This conference is now being recorded.
Welcome to the New York State Association School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is Falling to Plan is Planning to Fail. Failing to Plan is Planning to Fail. Sorry about that. Your host for today is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development with New York State ASBO. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. You may send chat questions during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. Please address chat questions to the Q&A group using a drop-down list located at the bottom of the chat window. I will now turn the call over to our host. Donna, please begin.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone to the Organization and Administration online course. This is the third webinar, and it is talking about planning. And our presenters, we have Peter Weber, Assistant Superintendent for Business for Hewlett-Woodmere Union Free School District, and Michael Sanangelo, Assistant Superintendent with the Schenectady City School District. They have some really good ideas about planning, lots of various perspectives. I'm sure you're going to find something here that's going to be helpful to you. Again, we encourage you to ask questions and send them to the chat group. And thank you so very much for participating in this webinar. And Peter is going to begin, and we look forward to his information about the definitions of planning and the rest of the great information that he and Mike have prepared.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody. We have a fairly lengthy presentation for today. We're going to try and leave some time at the end of it for questions and answers if we run tight. Mike and I will follow up after the fact, and we'll make sure to share those with you. The presentation that we have covers a fairly wide range of ideas. In the end, though, they distill down to some very basic processes, and we're going to try and help you get there. If you just take a moment and read the very first bullet point here. The concept sounds simple enough, but organizations in general, and your school district in particular, is quite complex. There are many stakeholders filled with different ideas, and often these ideas conflict, particularly when there are problems that are crying out for solutions. And our communities are filled with knowledgeable people. Each one brings a lifetime of experience to the situation. They have different backgrounds, they have different training, and they have a wide range of both attitudes and aptitudes. So when they come to you as part of the planning process, generally you can expect they have very little shared knowledge. Frequently, they have little shared experience. And as a result, you may find that you need to spend much more time planning the plan than you imagined at the beginning. This should not be a surprise if you've worked in school districts for many years. These are complex organizations, and sometimes it takes a lot of work to come up with simpler solutions. For any organization to succeed, it has to have a purpose. You can call it a mission. It may be part of a statement of core values. You may have a vision statement. However you term it, the members of the organization really need to know what it is and have some idea of how to carry it out. Inside the schools, we expect our employees to be able to carry out their work. And as you start the planning process, you really can't expect anything less from the planners. From the very beginning, they're going to need to understand why they've been selected or invited to participate. And they have to be willing to learn how to work effectively towards some common goals. As a former biology teacher, I always remember stories of life cycles and extinction. species, groups, schools, societies either learn to adapt and change, or they become obsolete and head towards extinction. The ability to continue to do what we've always done, the way we're used to doing it, has always been an illusion. And in this rapidly changing world, we often lack the luxury of sitting back and waiting for change to happen to us. Mike?
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. One of the themes I think that will probably play itself out in this webinar is the fact that planning can take on a lot of different types of aspects. By that I mean we're going to concentrate for the most part on strategic planning. However, there are many other types of planning, and I have put on this slide just a few just to get the you thinking and some conversation going. And if you just look at the first one, it's a different type of planning than strategic planning, and we'll get into all of the aspects of strategic planning momentarily. But comprehensive planning, regardless of what the title may imply, is really quite limited in scope. You'll see later on that within strategic planning, there is a methodology that is used to actually question or come up with new values and ideas and strategies, whereas with the comprehensive planning concept, somewhat limited to existing aspects of the organization. An example of this may be something to do with accreditation studies, and where you are trying to plan to do something that would conform to standards. Again, you're very limited in the using existing aspects of the organization and typically not allowed to go beyond those aspects. Another type of planning, sometimes thought of or even confused, I suppose, with strategic planning, is what is known as long-range planning. And again, this planning is for a period of time, over a number of years. It could be over a number of years, or it could be even more short-term. But it assumes that the knowledge that you have as you go into the planning process is sufficient to take care of your long-term or long-range plan. We'll see with strategic planning that concept is somewhat modified. But in long-range planning, again, a planning concept, but you're assuming current knowledge is sufficient for you to do your planning. One aspect or an example of that may be as we look at curriculum planning. We're usually looking that we understand certain aspects of the organization and of the curriculum itself, and therefore we are assuming that our knowledge is sufficient. Another type of planning is program planning. Usually this concentrates on a single idea within the context of the larger organization. For instance, you may have in your school district, you may have a public relations plan or a program. That would be a type of program plan. It's a specific department or aspect of the total larger organization. And so it reflects on a single idea rather than a comprehensive or a larger plan. And then the last one listed here is project planning. And this type of planning actually is where you design tasks to accomplish a specific purpose. Again, the purpose is very specific. It is very limited. We'll see that's not necessarily the case with strategic planning. And an example of that may be when school districts are involved in building construction projects. Again, that's a type of you're planning for a specific purpose, for a renovation, for an addition or maybe even a new building, but the purpose is very limited and very specific. And then the last half or last part of that slide is really just an indication of some time frames. Again, these can really be changed somewhat, but strategic planning, as it may imply intuitively, I think, is strategic in the sense that it is long-term, and it is strategies on how to achieve with a mission, and we'll see all of the different tenets that go into making up a strategic plan, and that is contrasted with operational planning, which is really trying to determine a vision, and usually can be for 1 year or less. Peter?
Thank you. You'll need to click me over.
One moment.
There we go.
Okay. We're going to be using a number of examples today, some analogies, to help make this process easier. And within that context, we want to talk a little bit, there we go, about roadmaps. And when we think about a roadmap, it's a way to help us get to where we want to go. And for me, I fall back on a story of my misspent youth. As a college student, one night a group of us had a really brilliant idea that the next morning we were going to escape from the really gray skies of Schenectady, and we were going to head on out to the beaches in Massachusetts in the middle of the winter. That probably wasn't a bright idea, but it sounded good at the time. None of us had any classes until Tuesday morning, at least none that we would admit to, and back then gas was 22 cents a gallon, so we really didn't need much money. The next morning, one of us had the idea of taking a scenic route through the Berkshires. And as we went up and down the hills, we stopped at the tourist traps. I insisted that we take a side trip to drive past the home of my new girlfriend, who later became my wife, so I guess it was worthwhile. And along the way, we had a nice, long, and liquid dinner. By the time we eventually got to the ferry, it was shut down for the night, and we never got to Nantucket. Now, that may have been fine for a group of us whose idea of a plan was figuring out our next scheme to avoid the draft. But when you really have a serious goal or you're facing major obstacles, then planning is going to be absolutely essential. And as you explore longer-term planning, strategic planning, or some of the other more complex forms, you're going to find, either deliberately or by accident, there will be many people who would like you to take the scenic detours, the thing that it would be really nice for you to see and do. And somehow at the end of the day, you never make it to your goal. One of the biggest complaints about strategic planning in any of its incarnations is that it's so complex. It has its own vocabulary, and the vocabulary isn't consistent from one model to another. People in the fields of business may use different terminology than those who are in a manufacturing context or those who are in the schools. It frequently involves metrics. Metrics is enough to scare off most educators before we start out the door. But you need metrics to measure progress. And by its nature, it frequently starts sounding to participants that it may create winners and losers. So with all this, plus putting in place monitoring to see if the plan is working, it's no accident that so many long-range plans seem doomed to fail. Or sometimes we say doomed to succeed, which may be worse. So we come back to a theme that we're going to repeat throughout today's presentation. You have to know your issues. The group that's working on this has to agree that the issues are important, and you have to make and do the struggle to find ways to help people understand that we're all in the same boat and that we have to get to our destination. Now we start getting to dangerous terms, a shared vision. For certain elements in our communities, this is scary enough. It sounds like we're trying to avoid doing anything. So many people have problems with this word. It seems dreamy, and it can be, but it can be deadly serious. Not too many years ago, Nintendo, the game company, was in very deep trouble. It didn't have the resources to compete against Sony and Microsoft in the unending race for faster, better, and more complex games. And it looked like they were headed for the toilet. The planners at Nintendo had a vision, and as they narrowed it down, it came down to developing a simple, reliable, easy to use, and highly adaptable machine. It didn't have to be the best, not the best chips, not the state-of-the-art graphics, not the highest price, but it had to be truly attractive across a broad group of users. They had no idea of how to get there, and they knew their time was running out. Their planning extended well beyond what was commonly understood to be the game business. And if we flash forward to now, there are millions of Wii consoles used by people probably from age 3 to 83 and beyond, all throughout the world. They changed the game in the face of insurmountable arguments. A vision comes in many forms. So a vision is really important. And figuring out a vision that's simple, clear, and that can be embraced by those in the process is difficult. And one thing that is always apparent, or almost always apparent, is the vision itself rarely contains the ultimate solution. And the funny thing about a vision is it can become so pervasive that people inside the organization and people outside the organization intuitively understand it, even if they can't remember the actual words. When you think about Google, or you think about Apple, and what they do and how they do it, if you were to write down what you think their vision is and go to the website, you'd be amazed at how close you come. You need to be able to plan how to develop the vision for your organization. Some people insist that the vision starts at the top, and others argue that it emerges from the aspirations and the needs of the stakeholders. Having gone through this process more than once or twice, I think back to what Tinkerbell said to Peter Pan: "The fairy dust only works if you believe it will." And so whether it's from the top down or it's from a broad-based group, the vision is critically important if your planning is going to have a chance of success. So now we can think about planning. Once you agree upon where you want to go, you can plan out the processes that have the best chance of success for your district in this time and given the environmental threats that you face. You're going to need to develop a structure that can be understood, a time frame that is workable, some would say survivable, and access to the right resources. You're going to have to overcome fear from the participants, fear of participating, fear of standing up for their own ideas, even fear of failure. And it's all part of the process. Mike?
The next slide indicates some pros and cons of strategic planning. I'm sure there are others, but we wanted to share with you a few just to get you thinking about some things, because not everything is positive. When you talk about planning, there are researchers that will tell you that there are some negatives to it. So we wanted to share with you just a few. And if you look at the first side, the pros, and that is that for most organizations, strategic planning will provide clear objectives and a direction for employees to look to or adapt to. Again, this is a requirement or necessary because of a changing environment. We'll talk a little bit later about what some of those environmental factors are. So the first one, it provides a general direction for employees. It also allows companies to anticipate and adapt to changing conditions. And because of that, one of the pros is the flexibility that it provides to allow companies or organizations in general to look at various aspects and to be somewhat more flexible as far as changing. And then the strategic plan also is a proactive approach to looking at what the organization is facing. In that case, if you don't do something, then there is no plan, as the title indicates of our webinar today. So at least by taking the time to do planning, you're being proactive. You are attempting to look at what those weaknesses or strengths of your organization, what those external factors and how they may impact your decision making. Now, some of the negatives or the cons on strategic planning. First of all, that we all know in the fast-paced world that we live in, that sometimes you can't change fast enough. Conditions are changing too fast for most of us to plan, and so long-term planning is a very difficult process, if not almost impossible, according to some. And so because of the pace of change, things changing too fast, it's one of those negative aspects of strategic planning. Sometimes one of the criticisms of strategic planning is that some of the objectives are somewhat vague and general. They're not specific enough and therefore do not relate well to possibly where the organization is going. And still another aspect of that is that the plans sometimes, the strategic plans, are not well done. And we'll see some of the aspects later on as to what you can do to make sure, or at least to encourage, a plan that is well done. So these items here are merely, I'm sure, guidelines. You can think, I'm sure, of a lot more of those, but they are there for your use and further study later on. Peter?
Okay. There are many ways towards developing this definition, and one way to go about it is to look for gaps. Gaps in performance, gaps in the service we provide, gaps in any other area. For those of us in the business world, they frequently are looking, particularly in this environment, to gaps in funding, particularly as we look forward to next year and then the end of the stimulus money going forward. It's a disconnect between the expectations and our ability to fulfill them, or what we perceive as our ability to fulfill them. It's one thing to identify the gaps, and if you have long and late board meetings, you know there are plenty of people out there who will be happy to tell you where the gaps are. It's another to use these gaps as opportunities and say, when we discover these, this is going to point to where we can improve performance. Okay, Mike?
Okay, thank you. Again, toward a definition of strategic planning, I put up one here from Dr. William Cook. Dr. Cook actually was a facilitator and is a well-written individual, and people read about his strategic plan through his company known as Cambridge Group, and he actually was our facilitator here at Schenectady for one of our strategic planning events that we had a few years ago. And I put his definition in. There are obviously others, but I think that they all tend to hit on certain ideas that I think will actually create somewhat of a good definition for a strategic plan. After that, I'm going to go through and try to explain what some of this may mean. But as you look at this, and you can read it, but it says, aimed at total concentration of the organization's entire resources on mutually predetermined measurable outcomes. Now, that may be and may sound like a mouthful for sure, but I think if we go to the next slide and we can take a look maybe and try to break out this wordy definition into some easier things possibly to consider. But again, we'll start with the strategic plan. Strategic in the sense that it is responsive to the environment, that we are always constantly looking at the environment, the external environment, and trying to determine the effect it has on our organization and on how we do decision making. And so it's strategic in that sense. And as we've talked about so far, it's a planning approach. It's a way to achieve the goals that we set out. It's, as we saw, not the only way, but it certainly is a way that has gained good favor with many. And the process that is used, the strategic planning process itself, is quite disciplined. There is a set of instructions, a set of ideas, a pre-planned roadmap, as we've said earlier, about how to engage in and have an outcome of a strategic plan. Also, I think in Dr. Cook's definition, when he talks about the entire resources of the organization, there has to be a commitment on all parts of all stakeholders. And stakeholders, when we're talking about strategic planning, are many. So there has to be a buy-in and commitment on the part of stakeholders, and also there has to be a commitment of funds. Certainly, if you have a strategic plan and you have action plans and strategies that you're trying to implement, you can't do that without adequate funding. And so that is a very important aspect, and you need to be concerned or careful that if you engage in strategic planning, or any kind of planning for that matter, there is a cost, a potential cost, and a potential funding that might have to go with that in order to make it work. And then the other part of this definition from Dr. Cook is that it is predetermined in the sense that the outcomes are agreed upon. We try to get to consensus on what the goals should be for the organization. And so that is where the wording of predetermined comes in. And certainly measurable outcomes is a very important thing in strategic planning. Actually, if it's not measurable, it may not be worth doing, is what some would tell you. So you need to come up with the outcomes, the predetermined outcomes that are also measurable so that you can see and plot exactly the progress that is being made on your plan. Peter?
Thank you. As Mike and I planned this, we worried that we would degenerate into some very esoteric jargon, particularly as we move ahead and start going through the details. And so we want to keep grounding you. not all long-term planning, not all strategic planning is about metrics and graphs. And although you may not see the relationship of the work we do to improving process on an assembly line, it may help to know that actually the founder of the process of long-term strategic planning is often credited back to our friend and antecedent, Mr. Dewey. His work was picked up by a group of people who worked in business and worked in industry, and it's carried on from there. And it's really only starting in the 1990s that it came echoing back in the world of learning communities as applied to schools. So it's not surprising that there will be people in your district who will want to stay away from this stuff, saying that it has nothing to do with it. And you may find that you need to take that right brain approach as you try to reel them in. Terminology is probably going to be important in this. Some people will not react well to the classic strategic planning model analysis of threats. However, they will understand in this world the concept of scarcity, the concepts of constraints. And so you're going to need to pick your language carefully. Tim Brown is a writer, a consultant, an artist, an industrial designer, who started off leaving the world of art, going to business to help them design better products and better looking products. And he moved on through time as people began, and he began to see that his product had to have a place to succeed no matter how well designed it was. And he has developed a concept known as design thinking. The example of the we that we opened up with is an example mentioned in his book, because the people at Nintendo recognized constraints. And rather than seeing them simply as threats, they decided to work within the constraints they had to move ahead. And so if some of the stuff that we're going to take you through as we go through the day sounds like things that you will not be able to bring back to the rest of your group, you may want to couch your terminology in terms of looking at scarcity, at looking at constraints. And the discussion then becomes one of feasibility, viability, and desirability. Is it possible that we can do it? Are we going to be able to do this in our districts and have it work? And is it something we really, really want? So if you take a moment and think about a child who's falling way behind in elementary school, and the child's study team is working at it and throws a full array of services into the problem, all kinds of tutoring and support. But what if it turns out the bottleneck, the constraint, is simply that he can't decode the words on a written page? All the effort made in the other areas is going to be largely wasted until you help him with this critical element of reading. Strategic planning is about finding the gaps. Strategic planning is about finding the bottleneck. Strategic planning is about making the breakthrough that allows you to move ahead. In an assembly line, the slowest portion of the assembly line controls the speed of the whole assembly line. Here in education, finding the right tools, the right diagnoses, the right prescriptions is what allows us to move ahead and change effectively. So, Mike, why do we plan?
Well, if you have determined the interaction of those three elements that you just saw on the last slide, then the question becomes, why planning? We've made some determinations. You may want to talk to your leadership team, and you may want to try to convince them why you would need to even undertake such a project as strategic planning. And it is a lengthy process. There are a number and several meetings that you will have to have. There's a lot of discussion. It is very time-consuming. Having done it several times, twice here at Schenectady within the last 10 years, I can tell you that it is a huge commitment of time. But what you need to determine is why, and what we're going to try to help you to answer is why. And I think it's simply stated in this, that public education is being affected so much by so many things now, and you need a way to try to come up with a vision and a commitment as to where your organization is going to go. And I have listed here just some of the things that obviously, and I'm sure they're obvious to you too, things that are out there in the environment that you need to deal with, and that is certainly special interest groups. And we talked, had the webinar last time about special interest groups and how they affect organizations. And certainly you need to, and strategic planning gives you the opportunity to look at these groups and to try to understand who they are and how to deal with them. Along with that is certainly, as we've all seen in our organizations, our school districts, special needs students. There is obviously a rising need in students and the needs that they have, and certainly students with disabilities and English as a second language are just a couple of those avenues that where students are needing services and where we need to plan accordingly. And certainly strategic planning is a way to be able to frame some of the questions that may come up because of these aspects. And certainly, lastly, but certainly no less than any of the others, is the economic challenges. We certainly know what that is through the New York State deficit. Some would say also that we're looking at some sort of a federal issue possibly down the line, even that we don't know or we haven't really experienced to date. But certainly the New York State economic scene is creating all sorts of issues for school districts, and there needs to be a methodology, a way to plan to deal with some of these aspects of the state deficit situation. And beyond that, and I think other things that are controlling or affecting economic challenges are certainly, as we've seen, the way that the structure of families has changed over the last several years. And we're looking at an aging population as the baby boomers start to get to senior citizen stage. And so our aging population certainly has implications for our programs and things that we do in the school district. We are a nation of diversity. There are a lot of different people that make up our country, and certainly that is continuing. And we are in need of trying to service some of their special needs, and so again, that's a reason to sit and to look and to plan. There are some teacher shortages, and actually some shortages in all the employee ranks, but certainly we have seen math and science and teacher shortages in that regard, and so we have this whole gamut of environmental factors that are hitting us and coming to us, and we need a methodology, a way to plan. And also, along with the economics, is the competition that public schools are facing that they have not seen prior, and competition from not only the private schools, which certainly we have seen throughout the years, many years, but new on the scene within the last several years of charter schools, and the impact that they have on programming and finances for the the school district. I can tell you from experience here at Schenectady with the charter school that we had in this district, where it took millions of dollars out of the flow to the public school and into the charter school realm, and it was quite a problem for our public school. And so all of these aspects and many, many more that have not been mentioned go into coming up with reasons why planning is necessary. And again, not to plan is a problem, because all of these things need to be dealt with in one fashion or another. So if we can move to the next slide, we'll look at some of the benefits of strategic planning. Again, we'll go through these relatively quickly. This is well written in many research articles. I'm sure that you can find a lot of information about this, but certainly one of the benefits is that it defines a purpose for the organization. It gives an opportunity for people to come together, to understand and to create a purpose that the organization is going to look forward to. It's an opportunity also to communicate goals to all stakeholders in the organization. And again, through this whole process of strategic planning, all those involved and beyond the core group and the action groups, beyond that, it's an opportunity to tell the public in general about the goals in the organization. And certainly when you have a huge or a large group of people coming together, engaging in this process called strategic planning, there is a sense of ownership when things are done. It enables people, they feel enabled, that they have been given the ability to influence the future of the organization. And certainly because of that, they feel this sense of ownership with their organization and with the plan that they came up with. It is also an opportunity to look at and to have effective resource utilization. A lot of times, or most of the time in strategic planning, you will be looking at cost-benefit analysis. You'll be making decisions or thinking about things and how you would fund or pay for some of the strategies and objectives that go into the plan. And so there is an opportunity there to use resources more effectively because not only have you had that opportunity to fully discuss it, but you're also looking at future funds and what may be available to effect the plan. And again, there are measurable results. We've said that before, and that goes, we keep on saying that because that's a very real and important aspect of the strategic plan, is to have results or objectives and strategies that you can measure so that you can show the stakeholders that you're on course with the plan that has been laid out for your school district. And then there's an opportunity to build consensus on things that the school district is dealing with. And so this is a very important aspect in many of our schools, most of our schools I would say, because there can be many, many special interest groups, again as we saw in the last webinar, and this is an opportunity to bring some of those folks in to a strategic planning process and help try to build consensus as to what we are all about and how we're going to go forward and plan accordingly. Peter?
Thank you. We could fill an entire page or many pages of examples of what planning is not. We need to remind you of some things that are critically important. Planning is not a solitary effort. You can't sit in your office and develop a strategic plan and have a prayer of any of it coming to be. And although we may reach out for a life preserver from time to time, the act of planning is not in itself a solution. What it is it provides you a path towards solutions, some of which you will actually discover as you travel down that path. It's about evaluating your circumstances and making some decisions on the approaches that you're going to follow to effectuate change. And it doesn't really matter whether it's analytic or performance-based. These really aren't the critical issues. There are some key elements that Mike is going to be taking you through that do form the critical elements. So, Mike, I pass it back to you.
Thank you. Some of the components or the components of a strategic plan, and these can vary. These are not necessarily fixed, but I think these are the most popular, if you will, aspects or components of a strategic plan. And so we want to go through and look at these. Again, if you look at a strategic plan, or if you become involved in that process, you should see these components in your plan. And again, that's could be a huge booklet, or it could be information on a computer disk, what have you. But it is a large volume of information that is typically assembled in a strategic plan, and these are the components. The first one that I have listed here is mission, and this is sometimes looked at as vision. Sometimes vision is set aside as different than mission, but by and large, I think in school districts we're looking at a mission, or it is the purpose. What do we want to accomplish in the school district? What is our primary focus, long-term and short-term? And what makes the school district unique? So all of these aspects, all of these things go into trying to create an identity or a mission for the school district. And also, I think, again, as we saw, one of the benefits in discussing a mission for your school district is that you may, hopefully you will, build some sort of consensus that everybody can rally around. And the next one is equally as important in building consensus, and that's beliefs, or the values that stakeholders are sharing amongst themselves. And it is the beliefs or the values are what drive the culture and the priorities of the school district. These are the what might be called uncompromising convictions that we believe in and that we are not willing to part from. And so it's very important that you get consensus and buy-in from all stakeholders on these important components. And then the next component is a parameter. And these are basically limitations on certain aspects of your plan. For instance, a limitation, an example of a limitation may be that there is nothing, this is a quote, nothing more important than student achievement. That is a limiting factor, a phrase that is in your plan. In other words, student achievement is above and beyond everything else that we may talk about. And so it is one of those parameters around which the rest of the plan is built. And as we have alluded to earlier, there is certainly a component of strategic plan that looks at your environment. And it looks at internal strengths and weaknesses within the organization, and it also looks at the external strengths or threats that may come against your organization. We're going to talk about a process, SWOT, I believe it's probably referred to as SWOT, but it's and we're going to talk about that in the next couple of slides. But let me just zero in on internal strengths and weaknesses. The strengths would be any qualities to enhance your programs. The weaknesses would be anything that might impede upon your ability to have strategies or objectives or your action plans. And I will show you in a couple slides down the road here what some of those weaknesses may be specifically to school organizations. And then the external analysis is a very critical analysis. It looks at social factors, technological factors, economic, and it's a whole analysis of things on the outside of the organization that may be limiting or have an effect on your organization. And then once again, we're back to the objectives, which should be some sort of measurable result. As an example of that, you may say that in your strategic plan that we must have 100% of our students pass the Regents exam, or something to that effect. But it's an objective, something that is measurable, but an objective that you, as in your organization, in your school district, are striving for. And then the strategies to get there, the goals, and the means, the policies to get there. So you have the end results, the goals that you're striving for, and also the means or the policies to get there. Those are your strategies. How are you going to make it happen? And then specifically, the action plans, which take the strategies and objectives and try to break them down in very specific tasks for others to work on to get to the actual result that you're looking for. And this is something where sometimes you hear that, well, what good is strategic planning or any planning? We did all this work and it sits on the shelf. And this is where it's necessary that administratively you need to push to get these action plans done. They need to be diligently undertaken if the plan is to work. And then there should be a cost-benefit analysis on your plans. Is there a sufficient benefit for your strategies and action plans to justify whatever the cost may be? And there's a whole methodology that you can find out about and get into to try to calculate a cost-benefit analysis for your plan. And then the last very important thing is to evaluate and reevaluate. You need to look at a strategic plan. It is a guideline. It is not a final rule, and therefore you need to look at that, update every quarter and annually, and to make sure that it is fresh and that it is working for you in the fashion that it was intended. If you go to the next slide, these are some business analysis techniques, and you can look at these, the SWOT, which looks at the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, and then we have the PEST, which looks at political, economic, social. You can see how these words come to be. The STEER, and the last one, a PISTOL, which is the environmental, political. We're going to zero in on the SWOT in a little more detail, but we're not going to touch, we don't have time to get into all of these other aspects. But they're there. If you have an interest, you can certainly find research on any of these. Again, they are approaches or analysis techniques that are used to look at the organization and its environment. So if we do go to the next slide, which is on the SWOT, which is I believe probably the methodology or the analysis technique that is used. It looks at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the organization. It attempts to look, again, externally at social factors, technology, economic, political, and demographic information, and not only in a local level where things may be affecting your school district. You may have things occurring in the municipalities that your district is in, or there may be some national things that are occurring as far as the economy and things of that nature that have a major impact on what's going to happen in your school district in the coming months and years. And then there's also this analysis for the internal organization, where you try to look at the, how are you managed? How are you governing? What's the organization look like? And et cetera. So there's this entire what's called environmental scan, both of external factors and internal factors, to determine threats, opportunities, weaknesses, and strengths of your organization. On the next slide, next two slides actually, but the first one indicates some of the weaknesses that maybe when you get into your strategic plan, you might find. There are many, many others. This is not all-inclusive by any means, just to give you a flavor for some of the ideas and things you may find. If you look at the weaknesses, someone may, in the strategic planning process, you ask and talk about this, someone may come up with, well, the Board of Education and Management are not on the same page. That's a weakness in our organization. That's something that's affecting us negatively. And therefore, we would look at to try to change that, or at least understand and realize that it's there. The same thing might be, someone may say, well, centralization of decision making is a weakness in our organization. All of the decisions are made at the district office level, and we on the building level don't get a chance to be involved in decision making. And then there may be, people may feel that certain special interest groups, again, that term coming up from the last webinar, that special interest groups that are out there are actually a weakness to the organization. That they are sane, or their methodologies are such that it's creating a weakness. And then the last one there, financial inequities and inadequacies. There may be building level concerns that certain buildings are getting more resources than others. And so these are just, again, examples of some of the weaknesses. And then on the next slide, we look at some of the possibilities of strengths. Again, this is not all inclusive, just to give you a flavor. Someone may say, well, our staff is a well-qualified staff, and we have a lot of good people that work hard, and so this is an aspect or a strength. And our test scores are very good, or we're doing well. Not to say we couldn't do better, but we feel that is a strength. The relationships that the school district may have with maybe the legislators or other groups. And then, of course, our parents may be strengths, and maybe a volunteer group, and it's well organized. Certainly, if the finances are good, that would certainly be a strength, and morale could also be one of the strengths. So there are many, many others. I don't mean to indicate in any way that these are all of them, but just to give you a flavor of what they could be. On the next slide, we talk about some of the models of strategic planning, and some of these again are just approaches, models that are used. The first one, the basic, seems to be the model that probably is used most often, where you identify a purpose or a mission, and then you select your goals and strategies and actions, etc. And then the next one could be issue-based. This is really where there is some issue that is facing the organization that you zero in on. You would do your external and internal SWOT on that and design strategies. Or you may have a strategic plan, but you need to fine-tune it maybe. The mission needs to be fine-tuned with the resources that are available, so you attempt to align your strategic plan with the resources that are available. And then there is a model known as scenario planning, strategic planning, which looks at external the external forces that may occur and trying to come up with different scenarios as to what could happen in your organization, and then you make a plan to tend to all of those. It may be like a worst case, the best case, and just an average case. And then the last one is known as organic or self-organizing. It's a development, or it's a plan that is evolving. It's not as fixed or mechanistic as some other manners of planning, and so the plan evolves in discussion, and you come up with a strategic plan in that fashion. So those are just some of the models. Again, the basic seems to be the one that is most often quoted and used. On the next slide, these are just some ideas about implementation. That obviously once you have your strategic plan, you want to publicize it. It's an opportunity to share the district mission and vision. Certainly you need a budget. As I mentioned before, the plan probably is of little value without sufficient funding, if funding is necessary. And then there is the evaluation and review period where you need to modify and look at various aspects. As was mentioned by Peter before, it is a roadmap, and so you need to review where you're going. Are you headed in the right direction? And if not, then you need to take measures to make things more realistic, or to organize the plan in some fashion that you can get to where you want to be. And then the next slide shows it's just an example of the of strategic planning. I'm not sure if we can click on that, but you certainly are welcome and can go to the Schenectady City School District website to look at our strategic plan. I think some of the aspects of strategic planning that we have dealt with that you may want to look at. First of all, do you need a facilitator? Do you need someone from the outside that's going to implement this plan for you, or help you through the process? Certainly if it's the first time you've done this, you probably do want to have a facilitator. If you think that there are a lot of ideas out there that people will have and the stakeholders will have, I think it's important to have a facilitator. Sometimes you can do it with an internal facilitator, although oftentimes those people are somewhat invested in what you're discussing, and sometimes it's thought that an outside facilitator can be more objective. Along with that, you certainly want to look at who to involve, and again, the benefit of a strategic plan is that you have a lot of stakeholders that are involved in the whole process of coming up with a plan. Certainly, it is important, though, I would say, to have the superintendent and adequate number of board members. And the reason for that is because once you go through this plan, if you don't have the buy-in by the superintendent or by at least a couple key people on your Board of Education, you may spend months planning and, again, go to the board, and maybe it won't get approved because the board didn't know what was going on. So it's always important to keep the board informed, and I think the best way to do that for strategic planning is to involve key people on your Board of Education. That way I think you can be assured, or at least more assured, that your plan will be accepted and adopted. Peter?
Thank you. As you can see from this list, you have lots of places to go for ideas. And you may find that based upon your specific experiences of those in the district, there's different levels of comfort with these. In some cases, there may be a discrete aversion to ones that sound much more mechanistic. So it's probably important, if you're serious to do this, to do a little bit of reading on your own and get at least a basic idea of what some of these are. They vary significantly in terms of the nitty-gritty details of how to go about it, but they share a tremendous number of common elements. And if you think about the information that Mike just shared with you, the elements become clear. Basically, you really can't plan if you don't recognize the real issues or problems that need to be addressed. Those are not always the ones that are said out loud. And you can't implement change unless you know what you're already doing and you've explored some options for moving ahead. So this isn't somebody's brilliant idea that they're going to launch a change, do some new adoption, and next year your district's going to be fine. And you can't test or measure your success until you know the results that you're looking for. That's your mission, that's your vision, that's your goal, depending on what you're looking at. And you've figured out and agreed on how you're going to measure the progress. Or else you're going to have the snipers out there planning to derail the work. And finally, unless you're absolutely brilliant and or incredibly lucky, you're not going to find the best solutions unless you're willing to learn from experience. And as you learn that, to keep refining your efforts or try new solutions. So what we're really talking about here is a planning cycle. This is probably the most used and most famous visualization of it. And as you strain to look at your screen and you see all sorts of options under each of these, please don't panic. What you need to do for each of these elements is pick a couple of pathways that will help you to get where you need to do, where you need to go. The Deming wheel has 4 parts: the plan, the do, the check, and the act. And once you get those down, you'll have mastered most of the jargon. The things that Mike was discussing start falling in place, and you can help put people back on track when they try and launch you on those interesting detours down the road. So, you decide where you want to go. That's the planning. How you get to that plan is listed in the different options below. We have effectively used brainstorming, reaching out to lots of groups, taking everything in, and then working towards synthesis. That works sometimes. And sometimes it is a statement that comes down from above, the board, the superintendent, or maybe the state education department, the way things are going, that tell us what things are going to be and the path that we're going to take. But we need to know what that plan is. You have to develop and test out ideas. You can't just say, I have a plan, I'm going out, I'm doing it. That's the fastest way to alienate everybody, because most of what you're going to throw together that way is untested, unlikely to work, and most likely to alienate. So you decide where you want to go, you develop and test out those ideas. You may do some little pilots, you may test it out with small groups. Check early on to see if they're working. Because if you think about what Mike said about cost benefit, if you think about buy-in, if you think about achievable goals and progress towards them, if the ideas you've come up with don't get you to where you want to go, or are so time-consuming or so expensive that you can't get there effectively, it's really not worth pursuing them the way they are. Once you've found some ideas that are feasible, that are viable, that are desirable, then go and act on them. Acting is going and trying and doing. It may be piloting a program, it may be reaching out to a special interest group, it may be working closely with your town or village or city. Who knows what it is? You'll figure that out, but you do it. And since this is a wheel, you plan, you do, you check, you act, and then you evaluate once again on the more global scale to see if it's getting you closer to where you want to go. Not that it's gotten you to your end. It will have gotten you closer, you hope. Based upon that, you go back to the drawing board, you make sure your plan is a good one, you go out and test some refinements, or in some cycles you look for a magic breakthrough, something that will really change your game plan dramatically. You test for feasibility, you keep trying it, and you go around and around and around on it. Now, some of us wish that the State Education Department would try this out before they inflict some new ideas on us all the time. But sometimes we don't have those options. It's really important to select the key planners in this upper left-hand corner over here, because the people who set and help develop the plan are going to set the path, at least for the first cycle. As you go through the cycle and you do the work and you actually implement it, when you come around to it next time, there are going to be some new people who have emerged, who have become important players. They're going to help you refine your plan. They're going to help you assign the work, and they're going to buy in turn from possible opponents or bystanders into stakeholders. And so you go around and around and around. This is really, really important. In the process, you're going to be investigating, you're going to be finding problems, bottlenecks, new key issues. You're going to have to dissuade people from getting stuck on minor items. It's called don't tinker in the margins and don't get sidetracked down detours. So what we're doing is we're planning to do, we're planning to test, we're planning to evaluate. We move down the cycle, and as you get ready to do this, remember this is a long-term strategic plan. There are expectations out there. They want to be able to see how you make this operational. And so that's really important. You have a plan that may take years to be realized, and you have to produce results. And so we now have to talk about the operational side. Okay, and I'm going to jump a little bit ahead here. If you look at the left-hand side of this chart, there's the planning cycle. It's just portrayed a little bit differently. And on the right-hand side is one operational team. Okay. Operational teams have a different thinking process. They're the body that's carrying out the plans that's coming from the brain. They're charged with doing the work of the district to help you move towards your short and intermediate term goals. They're the ones who are operating the lab, testing out ideas to see if they make sense. And it may even take other teams to translate them. Operational team members think like this. Do we understand the plan? Do we understand what we're asked to accomplish? Can we think of good solutions that move us closer towards the goal, which are going to get us closer to a best solution down the line? How do we know that these steps are actually going to be helpful? And when we're ready to try it, will we be able to measure our results and acknowledge whether or not it worked or it didn't work and where we should go ahead? Are we ready to take the risk and report it back to the people in planning so that they can act on what we have learned? The term of art for an operational team is called process improvement. The reality is to give the people who really understand the work that has to be done the resources and support so they can move the progress along and the process along. Because if all you do is stay inside of here at the top level, you have wonderful documents that might say, gather dust in the offices in loose leaves, and you can chuckle about them a year ahead as you throw them into the garbage pail. Well, this sounds good, and there's a lot of work, and we keep talking to you about pitfalls, all right? And there are just a couple of things due to the time constraints that we want to talk about. And the biggest problem you're going to face if you decide to implement this is the question of group size. You've all had experience when you've brought together a big group of people and you're trying to come up with a solution. The process is slow. The specialists and the administrators jockey for position. They're busy competing for influence. Frequently, hours later, the end result is exhaustion and reluctant compromise. Then comes the finger pointing. Well, you got what you wanted and it didn't work. Wasn't my idea. No breakthroughs come through. There's very little willingness to take risk. And surprise, surprise, there's almost no progress. This is known as groupthink. Groupthink. It's a multidisciplinary group, all sorts of backgrounds, no ownership, turf battles, and a contest for dealing with scarce resources. Interdisciplinary groups are different than that. And the goal here, and this is a challenge for you, is to find core groups that are operational groups that are going to carry out aspects of the work and give them the authority to call upon the specialists in your community, in your district and outside, to get the help when they need it. When they've got the help, say thank you to the specialists and get them out of the way so they can go back and do their work. What you get is a focus on goals, you get ownership in the team, and you get progress. We'd like you to think big thoughts. Spread and believe in the vision, the mission, the goals. Make sure that the people in your core planning group and the people in your operational groups buy in. You depend on them to move this every inch of the way. Plan, do, check, act, again and again and again. Always looking towards your goals, making sure the wind hasn't shifted. Your success is going to be what attracts the new believers. And at this point, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground, but very, very lightly. We do recommend that you go to the resources. There's a tremendous amount of advice out there. Lots of us who've gone through this process and can help you out. And you will find support in your community, particularly if you have larger organizations, whether they be for-profit, non-profit agencies, and plenty of people who will be happy to share with you the things that got in the way and the things that got them through it. So with that, I think we're open for questions and answers.
Okay, well, certainly. Thank you, Michael and Peter. And if you do have a question, please send it to the Q&A group. And Michelle, if you'll please remind our listeners on how they can ask an audio question.
Yes, Donna, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who would like to ask an audio question, please press the number 7 followed by the pound key in your telephone now, and you'll be placed in a queue in the order received. Prepare to ask your question when your name is called. Again, 7 pound to ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Well, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I think there was a lot that was covered, and strategic planning can be used for so many different things, and it is good that there's just so many key points that you mentioned about having the right people in at the right time and that buy-in, and how do people really gain ownership, and all of that is just so very important. Are there any other points or some that in your experience, I know the both of you have been involved in many forms of strategic planning, that can you think of some that you can really pinpoint on why they work so well or why some just never seem to have gotten off the ground?
Well, maybe I can give almost a parting example for people. How things work out when you plan in totally unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of years ago, we decided to encourage the formation of a foundation that would develop an endowment for the school district because we were worried resources were going to get tight. And a group came together, not directly related to the school, and they started planning with big ideas. They were going to have golf outings and gala events and all kinds of things that required lots of organization that never got off the ground. And they were struggling in a way to be relevant and raise some money. At the same time, our art department, in terms of design, was worried about loss of support in the community and people not understanding the importance of the arts. and they were struggling with ideas that they could share with the community that can make arts visible and make arts important, but they had no resources to do it and didn't see a way out. The endowment group, which was desperate, heard about the arts group. Through a series of conversations, they started talking about cities where people painted horses, places like Saratoga, all sorts of other things like that. They found somebody who could produce a mold of our team mascot, the bulldog. We started producing some bulldogs that are about 2/3 life-size. The endowment group went out and started soliciting sponsors who would sponsor the painting of a bulldog and would sponsor placing it in the community. The arts department provided classes and training and started going out to other groups to find people excited to actually create the bulldogs, which will be placed on display when they're finished, and then we're going to have a public auction of them. And the proceeds will be split between the art department and the endowment. In the process, we have gotten incredible attention from alumni who had disappeared, including some very well-known designers, people who are doing things for us that range from a group of kindergarten students out through professional design studios in New York City, all of which will be side by side. There is a buzz about the endowment. Contributions are coming in above and beyond it, well before the auction. The art department is energized. Professionals are coming in and giving classes to help the students deal with their own bulldogs. Both sides are seeing a win-win, but everybody in the community is celebrating and waiting for the result.
Oh, wow, what a nice story. That's a great opportunity to get high visibility. And isn't it nice that those two groups somehow got together? Good example. So often you do have many groups working in the schools, and their end results are very similar, but they don't seem to talk. It's nice to be able to get everyone together and see how you can work together. Any other points that you'd like to share? We don't seem to have any questions coming in. Any final words?
Donna, I would say, this is Mike, and I would just say that, sometimes I think organizations, school districts, we tend to wait maybe until we're ready to do the planning in a formal type of way. Sometimes I think we miss out on that. I know here at Schenectady, as I mentioned, we've been through two formal processes in the last few years, and I think one was more formal, the other one was more informal. And I think the message that came out of the informal is, let's not wait necessarily for everything to come together. Let's begin our process as soon as we can, and we'll work on some of the deficiencies, if any, in that whole process. But I think, as the title of this webinar implies, you can't not plan. You have to do some planning. And so rather than wait until everything seems to be just right, I think it's just a good notion to get going. Start on it, and then try to work out the details later on. There's nothing wrong, and I know from our own experience here, there's nothing wrong with informal approach to this too, I think. And again, I think I've seen it both ways here at Schenectady, and certainly the end result, the product that's out there on our website that people can look at is, in my opinion, went through more of an informal, although we had an outside facilitator also, but nonetheless, I think the approach to it was somewhat more informal than our first attempt at this some years ago. So start planning, because we have all of these urgencies occurring in our schools, and we need to come together. You need to come together in your school districts to understand what the changes are and how they will affect the long-term well-being of the organization.
Well, thank you. I think that's also good advice, because sometimes we do have paralysis by analysis, and things do get put off too long, and so there has to be a balance. You don't want to start immediately without having some thoughts of what's going on, but you don't want to hold up too long either. Well, thank you so very much, Peter and Michael. Appreciate all the work that you've done at this busy time of year. Thank all of you who are with us for attending. And if you are taking the online course, which means that you attend the 3 webinars and then you have some activities to do, you go to the conference room on the New York State ASBO website, click on conference room, then go in and click on Organization and Administration online course, and your comments, your information is due by February 12th. Thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Actually, next week we have 3 of them coming. And we are now able to offer some CPEs for webinars, so stay tuned and look for that information as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna. And to our speakers, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's New York State ASBO webinar. Thank you for attending.